This is a two-dimensional holographic effect for GameMaker. It can be used on any sprite and gives you a ton of different controls over the holographic effects. So I want to take a moment to show you how to install this asset and all of the different configurations that you can play with. I will timestamp the video, so if you have a very specific effect that you want to look at, then feel free to jump to that timestamp. So linked in the video description below is a link to my gen2games.itch.io page. If we go ahead and click on the asset, and here I list out all of the features that are included, as well as a quick implementation and show off some GIFs of what to expect. So let's go to download it. The download includes two files, a demo and the package content itself. So first I will open up GameMaker and I will create a new project. Now I will go Tools, Import Local Package. I will select the file and I will click Add All, Import. And now if I open up the hologram folder, we can see that I have all of the components for the hologram. This is not the entire demo scene. This is just what is necessary for the hologram. So let's go ahead and create a sprite. I'm going to anchor the sprite at the bottom center. Now I will create an object, add a create, a step, a draw, and a cleanup event. Now I will instantiate my hologram. Hologram is new hologram. In my step event, I will say hologram update XY. In my draw event, I will say hologram render XY. In my cleanup, I will say hologram cleanup. Now I will specify the sprite index. I'll say SPR Gen2. Now I will open up my room and I will drag my OBJ Gen2 into the center of the room. Now if I hit play, we can see that I have a very basic image here with a reflection. Awesome. This means that it's working. But I don't have my ability to interface with the debug GUI. So now, in order to activate the debug hologram, debug new instance. And if I run the project, we can see that now I have the debug interface. So let's go ahead and make some adjustments and see if this works. And we can see that we have control over the hologram. So this is all that's necessary to get the asset up and running in your project. Next, I will go over each of the individual effects in detail. Okay, so you've downloaded and opened the demo file. If we take a look at our asset browser, we'll notice two folders. One is a hologram folder and the other is the scene. You can take a look at our OBJ globe object. So let's go ahead and take a look at this object and we'll notice that we have a few events. Let's just take a look at the create event. All right, so on the right side, we have the hologram definition, and on the left side, we have the implementation. So first, let's take a look at the definition. One thing to notice in every iceberg project is a section referred to as events. These events are mandatory. If you wish to achieve the desired functionality, you must call these events. The update we will put in a step event inside of GameMaker. The render will go inside of a draw event. So if I open up my globes step event, we will see that we have hologram.update. Same as if I open up the draw event, we'll see that we call hologram render. And if I also open up the cleanup event, we'll see that we call hologram cleanup. So these event methods are necessary. We have to call them. If we go to the create event, the thing that I want to pay attention to and emphasize is the config struct. If you aren't familiar with the config struct, I have two videos covering the config struct, but the idea is that the config struct is a struct. It contains optional parameters that control the behavior of the hologram instance. And we can find out what parameters we have available to us by looking at the region. So let's say that I wanted to control the noise static shader. I could come to the hologram definition on the right, expand the noise, come down to the private, and we can see that we have two parameters that can come in through the config struct, noise active, noise alpha. So if I come back over to the hologram, let's get rid of every other parameter. We will notice that we have a very basic planet sprite here. If I say noise active is true and noise alpha is 0.8, we can see that the noise is active and the alpha is very opaque. Every parameter that we wish to control can be passed into this struct that gets passed into the hologram. Additionally, if I wish to control those values after the instantiation of the hologram class, I can use these getters and setter methods to control it. Now I can say hologram noise set alpha 0.1. But now we can see that it is very transparent. Let's say I wanted to look at chromatic aberration, which is another effect, dispersion. We can open up private and we can see that we have 7 parameters that we have access to. So if I wanted to control these upon instantiation, I would just add these fields to the config struct over here on the left. Or I could choose to use the getters and setters to change those values. The first category is sprite. This allows us to control things like animation speed if the sprite is enabled, and caching. The purpose of the cache is to speed up performance, but it does increase memory size. This is a trade-off that will be up to you depending on your project. So if you plan on changing the sprite index of your hologram frequently, then I recommend enabling caching. If the sprite doesn't change ever, then you can disable caching. All right, so coming back to the other sprite controls, we have Y offset, which is gonna change the vertical space from 0. We also have scale values, scale X and scale Y do the same also. We have color. We can change the core color of our sprite. Same with the alpha of the sprite and the fade. We have 3 presets, which is no fade, fade where it fades from bottom to top, and another one where it fades top to bottom. This bottom section here, surface visible, is usually for debugging. So this whole sprite gets rendered onto a surface, and that's how we do some of the other effects cheaply. If you're having an effect that doesn't quite look correct, I recommend enabling the surface. This will help you see it. If you need to, you can increase the padding. In fact, let me show you an effect that relies on this right now. If I come to shift, if you look really closely on the right side here, you'll actually see that we have some cutoff. And this is noticed if I increase the offset by a lot. Here on the right side, we have a very drastic, abrupt cutoff. So this is where increasing the surface padding would actually be a good idea. And if I increase the surface padding and I turn it off, we can see that this looks much better. Ground is a small visual effect. This may not be relevant to your project. It's probably only appropriate for top-down or 2.5 dimension perspectives, as it adds just a ground shape to the bottom. So if I enable it and turn it on, we can see that it just kind of gives like a shadow effect that gets cast onto the ground. And I can control the dimensions of this, as well as the color of it and the alpha. So for side view platformer projects, this is probably not an effect you would want to use, but for top-down projects, this can be a nice little addition to give the hologram some more presence in the world. Additionally, reflections achieve this same idea where it casts the reflection onto the ground. So we can change the opacity of this as well as the color of this reflection. Artifact is a weird one. The best way to see it is I'm going to just make it as extreme as possible. The idea is that it just takes a random snippet from the sprite and then draws it on top of the sprite. So you'll notice that sometimes we get like the curved edge of the planet here drawn in the bottom left corner or in the middle, controlling the width and height of this square, and then controlling things like how quickly it flickers, how much time it spends on and how much time it spends off, color and alpha. So if I set the width min to 0 and the width max to 50, we can see that now we might get really thin little snippets. If I decrease this width max here, all of them are going to actually be pretty skinny now. This width min and max sets the bounds for the random range that it will choose from. Speed is inverted. High speed is actually slower. This is the amount of time in between flickers. So if I set the speed to really low, we'll see that we have very fast flickers. Whereas if I increase it, it slows down. Time on and time off is how much time it spends on and off. So if I set the speed really fast, you'll see that we get 100 frames on and then 100 frames off. So if I set time off to extremely low, we kind of get this effect all the time. My recommendation for this is to set a really high time off and a really low time on with a moderately slow speed. I think with this, less is more, as is the case with a lot of these effects. A lot of these effects, you really kind of want to keep them subtle. Otherwise, it gets very overwhelming. Glitch are the line skips. So let's increase the size of this. You'll notice that, okay, here we have this size skipping. Now the size is anywhere from 0 to the size that's set. So you'll notice that sometimes the space in between is bigger than others. This gives it a nice organic look. So if I set the size to 1, you'll notice that the skip is always really thin. And the same thing for time on and time off. So if I increase time on and decrease time off, okay, we'll constantly ensure that this effect is happening. If we increase the size, all right, and then the chance is chance per frame that it happens. So here we have a 1 in 10 chance that the glitch happens. So if I increase this all the time, we just get chaotic spazzing. But if I decrease this to 0, well, nothing's going to happen. Again, my recommendation here is less is more. The size you can go pretty big on. Keep the chance low, keep the time on low, and keep the time off pretty high. And we get a pretty nice looking effect here. Scanline, this is our scanline effect. This just gives the sense of motion. So I can control the thickness. I can have a 1 pixel line or a 50 pixel. We can change the opacity and the color. This green does not look good, but maybe like a fuchsia color with a low opacity could look cool. We can change the direction to either scan up or scan down, and we can change the speed. So usually I like to set this to a white color with a low opacity and a moderately fast speed. It gives a sense of projecting this display multiple times a second. Shift we covered earlier. This is a visual offset. So again, I can change the direction, I can change the speed, and I can change the offset of this too. Again, less is more here. All right, the backlight and the front light I'm going to group together because they are the same. One is just depth sorted in front of the planet. One is depth sorted behind the hologram. So if I enable the backlight, we can see here that we have this pillar of light. I can change the height and I can change the Y offset. Additionally, I can change the width at the top as well as the width at the bottom. But we can also do things like make the top fade out, whereas the bottom is really strong. And we can also change the color of the top and the bottom. So a nice one is to set the bottom to like a black color and have that fade to 0 maybe. Have the top be like a white color, and the height, we want this to be off screen. That's kind of a cool effect. Flickering is just going to add a slight randomization to the position. Here we can change the size of the flicker and again the speed. So the front light is the exact same thing, but now we have a light that is in front of the planet. So these are kind of fun to layer on top of each other because you can do some really cool kind of depth sorted effects here. Dispersion is chromatic aberration. So if I enable it, we can see that we get this blurring color channel separation. This is going to be the spread of the color channels. So if I set this to 0, it looks normal. But as I increase it, we can see that the spacing in between these grows. Again, less is more here. I can change the direction of the spread. So let's increase the spread all the way just to demonstrate the direction here that we can change. And again, shake is another feature that I can enable. So the last category I'm going to cover is smoke, and these are particles. So if I enable them, we'll get some smoke particles. So these are the amount of particles emitted per step. So as we crank this up, we can see that we get a ton of them. If I turn it down, we have 0. The rate is how many steps before each particle is emitted. So right now, every 5 steps, we emit 3 particles, and the position of those particles are randomized. So if I decrease the rate to 1 and increase the amount to 10, we have an insane amount of particles. Whereas if I decrease the amount to 1 and I increase the rate to 1 a second, we will just see very few particles get created. Oh, there's a couple of them. So I think whatever my default is actually pretty solid. I think it's 3 particles every 10 seconds or something like that. Maybe 5 frames, sorry, every 5 frames. And then spread, again, is going to be your distance from center that it can spawn out to. So if the spread is low, at 0, it's only going to spawn at the center. If your spread is high, it's going to randomize in between anywhere in this dimension here. Typically, you'll probably want this to be about the size of the sprite. And again, here we can change the size and the scaling of the smoke particles. I wouldn't recommend it, but again, it's up to you. The one that is fun to change are the colors, actually. I like actually setting some of the colors. One thing I do like setting is like the final color to be about the same color as the sprite itself. This kind of gives it a more connected feeling to the actual object itself. Okay, so that's every category covered. I'm going to go ahead and just, for fun, lastly, go through here and make changes to all of the categories to show you what the final output could look like. All right, and there we go. Here I have just added a bunch of effects to it. Again, you can play around with this for forever. I appreciate you guys hanging out and checking out this asset. If you're interested in supporting the channel, consider purchasing the asset for yourself and playing around with it and plugging it into your project. Again, if you have any questions or problems, feel free to leave them in the comments or join the Discord and message me directly. Otherwise, I will see you guys in the next video, which will be another iceberg tutorial.